world.
We're extremely disappointed with reports that Mr. Duvalier may not be charged with any human rights crimes, despite numerous complaints by victims to the prosecutor.
The International Criminal Court loses momentum over Haitian atrocities, and hopes for speedy democracy in Libya begin to unravel.
Criticism of Libya's interim leadership has grown, and in recent days has been expressed in ways which go beyond the healthy democratic spirit and has led to the resignation of the vice chairman of the NTC.
This is The World with Tim Stackpool.
Hello and thanks for joining us once again. We'll also learn about teaching music in northern Argentina's impenetrable jungle. But first, there's still plenty of unrest in Libya, with the country's interim leaders facing huge challenges to stabilise the nation. Ian Martin is the UN envoy in the region, and he says the continued abundance of weapons on the streets and the presence of armed brigades in the country doesn't help. Meanwhile, a recent outbreak of violence in Bani Walid, a former Gaddafi stronghold, is blocking reconciliation efforts. Jocelyn Sambira has more.
Public frustration and criticism against the interim leaders in Libya has grown since November last year. That's what Ian Martin, the Secretary General's special representative in Libya, told the Security Council on Wednesday. The people are demanding more accountability and transparency in public affairs, he added.
As the countdown towards elections began, civil society was becoming increasingly assertive in monitoring and critiquing the performance of the National Transitional Council and the government. Criticism of Libya's interim leadership has grown, and in recent days has been expressed in ways which go beyond the healthy democratic spirit, including some physical violence, and has led to the resignation of the vice chairman of the NTC.
The outbreak of fighting in Bani Walid highlights the challenge of reconciliation. The NTC has encountered huge problems appointing a new leadership in Bani Walid and the town of Sirte that the public supports. In the case of Bani Walid, the negotiations fell through. Ian Martin again.
Regrettably, in the charged local atmosphere, a security-related incident triggered clashes between members of the local population and the Revolutionary Brigade stationed in the city, as a result of which several were reportedly killed. This has been misreported as pro-Gaddafi forces taking back control of the city. The government responded by dispatching units from the National Army and is currently engaging with all stakeholders to contain the situation and address the underlying security and political challenges in Bani Walid.
The UN is engaged in Libya on many levels. Navi Pillay, the UN Human Rights Chief, says her office stands by ready to assist with the transitional justice process.
We must not forget that the Libyan people rose up to remove a tyrannical ruler whose regime committed atrocious human rights violations against its own people. Torture, unlawful killings, and enforced disappearance were widely practiced. Families of the disappeared, including over 1,200 prisoners allegedly killed in the 1996 Abu Salim prison massacre, continue to wait for truth and for justice to be done.
However, Ms. Pillay also expressed her deep concern over the reports of abuse and torture in Libya's detention centers controlled by revolutionary brigades. Ms. Pillay again.
Undoubtedly, immense challenges lie ahead. The interim government still does not exercise effective control over the revolutionary brigades, and this has human rights repercussions in a number of areas. Light and heavy weaponry in the hands of these brigades pose a threat to public security and the protection of the human rights of the population.
200,000 people were forced out of their homes during the uprising that began in February 2011 and triggered a massive conflict in Libya. As of January 2012, the UN estimates that 60% of Libyans have not been able to return. As of January 2012, the UN estimates that 60% of Libyans have not been able to return to their homes, particularly in the former Gaddafi strongholds of Bani Walid and Sirte.
Jocelyn Sambira with that story. Investing in the social and economic development of women and girls yields big payoffs for them, their families and their communities. But in some areas, women are still shut out of some professions, such as information and communication technologies or ICTs, which are viewed as stereotypically male. The International Telecommunications Union says girls remain underrepresented in computer science and engineering programs, which could lead to careers in ICTs. Patrick Megwa spoke to the ITU's Susan Shaw about what the agency is doing to level the playing field.
Our members have backed an initiative to encourage girls and women to enter careers in the ICT sector. So we're doing this through a number of different measures. The first one is the idea of celebrating an International Girls in ICT Day on the fourth Thursday of every April, and this year will be 26th of April 2012. And in addition, we've created the Girls in ICT portal.
What is on this portal?
The portal is designed to help support and encourage young women and teenage girls who are interested in a career in ICTs through a number of different measures that are necessary. One, young women and girls need role models, and so the portal contains profiles of women who are actually ICT professionals today, and they're profiles of women from around the world actually involved in a variety of different kinds of ICT jobs. It also has very practical information for girls. We have over 400 programs from around the world that could help encourage and support girls as they consider a career in ICTs. We have over, I think, 125 scholarship programs. We have information about technology camps. We have information on online networks that girls could participate in, and internship opportunities, for example.
Well, that's a lot of information, but what are the immediate benefits they would get from the portal?
Okay, so the immediate benefits are to understand what might be the opportunities in the ICT sector for them. I think a lot of women and girls don't realize that the ICT sector is a growing sector, and there are actually lots of employment opportunities out there for qualified women in the sector. Companies and countries in North America and Europe, for example, have a predicted skills shortfall of some 1.5 million employees in this sector. But it's not just a question of developed countries, it's also developing countries as well. Brazil, for example, has announced a skills shortfall of 200,000 employees. And Brazil has announced that it's going to look for talent wherever it might be able to find it. So this could be good news for girls and young women in developing countries as well. So we're trying to get the word out. We've launched a media campaign on this in terms of issuing our press release. We're getting in touch with different organizations that are involved through Facebook and Twitter. And by the reaction that we're getting, I think that the word is getting out.
Is this an acknowledgement that girls are not going into IT, or they're finding it a difficult subject to get into while in school?
The problem is that many girls either don't think about it, or their parents or their teachers don't realize the opportunities out there. So as I said in the beginning, this is a growing ICT sector. There are many job opportunities out there, but unfortunately what we've also seen is that the number of women entering the sector is not increasing. And so many companies really seek to try to target this population. Because they have this skills shortfall, there aren't enough men that are preparing themselves for this sector either. So they want to make sure that 50% of the world's population is also aware of this and preparing themselves. And we're talking about having skills in the STEM fields like science, technology, engineering, and math.
Well, the focus has certainly been on Syria this week, as a packed UN Security Council has been hearing calls for support of an Arab League plan to resolve the unrest that's been continuing in Syria for the past 10 months. But the Security Council has been unable to come up with a solution to the ongoing crisis. Senior leaders, including the Arab League Secretary General, the US Secretary of State, and the Foreign Affairs Ministers of France, the UK and Germany were in New York for the meeting. Diane Penn has more.
The UN estimates more than 5,000 people in Syria have been killed following uprisings against President Bashar al-Assad that began 10 months ago. Qatar's Prime Minister Sheikh Hamad bin Jassim bin Jabbar Al Thani described Syria as being dear to the heart of all Arabs.
نحن نجتمع اليوم وأنظار الثكالى واليتامى والأرامل وآلاف الجرحى والمعتقلين. We meet today under the watchful eyes of the bereaved, the orphans, the widows, and the thousands of wounded, detainees, displaced children, young people, elderly, and women who continue to hope that they would gain the support of the Security Council so that they would live a decent, free life that would be based on right, justice, and good governance.
The Security Council deliberations are centered around a draft resolution tabled by Morocco. It is based on a proposal put forward by the League of Arab States. U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton urged Council members to back the Arab League's demand that Syria's government immediately halt all attacks on civilians.
For many months, the people of the region and the world have watched in horror as the Assad regime executed a campaign of violence against its own citizens. Civilians gunned down in the streets, women and children tortured and killed. No one is safe, not even officials of the Syrian Arab Red Crescent.
Bashar Jafari, Syria's ambassador to the UN, said his country was going through decisive challenges in its history.
إن الوطنية السورية ترفض التدخل الخارجي.
Syrian patriotism rejects external intervention and stresses that Syria's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity is a red line. Syrian patriotism stresses that Syrians will stand one rank against dissent, rejecting violence, rejecting resorting to arms, while calling for reform.
The situation in Syria is part of a wave that swept through several North African countries in early 2011, resulting in the toppling of long-standing regimes in countries like Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, and Yemen. The UN estimates that more than 5,000 people have died already in Syria. Hillary Clinton, the U.S. Secretary of State, observes the number is rising.
We all have a choice: stand with the people of Syria and the region, or become complicit in the continuing violence there.
Eyes will remain on Syria to see if the violence continues or to see if Syria heeds the warning of the Security Council.
Diane Penn reporting.
This is The World with Tim Stackpool.
Former Haitian leader Jean-Claude Duvalier might only face trial for financial corruption charges during his regime and not human rights violations, a move which concerns human rights officials around the world. Human rights spokesperson Rupert Colville said local and international human rights groups have well-documented evidence that torture and extrajudicial killings occurred during Mr. Duvalier's regime. Charles Appel reports.
Rupert Colville said media reports quoting Haitian judicial officials suggest Jean-Claude Duvalier might not face the more serious charges. They include torture, rape, and extrajudicial killings.
We're extremely disappointed with reports that Mr. Duvalier may not be charged with any human rights crimes, despite numerous complaints by victims to the prosecutor.
Mr. Colville said Haitian and international human rights groups have extensive documentation of crimes committed during Duvalier's 15-year presidency. Jean-Claude Duvalier ruled Haiti from 1971 to 1986 when he was overthrown in a popular uprising. He returned to the country in January 2011 after years in exile in France. Known as Baby Doc, Duvalier succeeded his father François, the president for life. Haitians referred to the elder Duvalier, a former doctor, as Papa Doc. Mr. Colville of the UN Human Rights Office said it was rather bizarre that Mr. Duvalier might escape charges for human rights violations.
It's clear under international law that there's no statute of limitations for such crimes, and the UN Human Rights Office has provided technical assistance and legal advice stressing this point to the Haitian authorities.
He said the UN Human Rights Office has repeatedly reminded the Haitian authorities to investigate the violations and prosecute those charged.
Impunity for such serious crimes cannot be allowed to prevail, and we urge the relevant authorities to ensure that justice is, albeit belatedly, delivered to the many victims of human rights abuses committed under the government of Mr. Duvalier. There can be no true reconciliation and forgiveness without justice.
Charles Appel, United Nations.
Victims of the Holocaust in Europe were remembered this week on the anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz death camp. An estimated 6 million people mainly Jews, were murdered by Nazi Germany during the Second World War. One of those was Moshe Flinker, a teenager who wrote a diary about life under Nazi occupation in Belgium. He and his parents were arrested in Brussels in 1944 and deported to Auschwitz, where they were murdered. Maha Fayek spoke to Ghislaine Sibon, who is currently translating Moshe Flinker's diary into French.
The young Moshe Flinker lived in Brussels between 1942 and 1944, and he wrote there his diary, which has been found by his sister returning from Auschwitz in 1945 in the place where they lived, in Brussels, and they brought this diary, which was composed of 3 different parts, in Israel, where they decided to live. The diary went from hand to hand and in fact was shown to the Nobel Prize Israeli writer Shmuel Yosef Agnon. And Agnon was so impressed by the quality of the diary that he recommended it for publication to Yad Vashem. And Yad Vashem published the original version of the diary, which was written in Hebrew in 1958, and subsequently published the English translation. And it must be said that the diary has been also translated in various languages, in Dutch, obviously, in Yiddish, in Italian, and in German, and I'm currently translating it into French.
You think very highly of this young boy, Moshe Flinker, that you even call a visionary.
Yes, how can I call him differently when we can read in his diary the reflections that he develops, both on the way that the war is going on. He is very well aware of what's going in the various battles, both in North Africa, in Soviet Union, and he is very well conscious that, for example, behind the battle which is taking place on both sides, American, English, French on one side, Soviet Union on the other side, that there is a secret war for the conquest of the Europe. And he's writing that one should not be naive to believe that the objective of the Soviet Union is to liberate Europe, but it's also to conquer Europe. And I think that to write such things at his age mean that he was really a visionary. Not only on the front was he a visionary on the development of the various situations in the front, but also he was visionary in the future of his people, because he was in the worst ever situation in which the Jewish people was, and there in the middle of the night he saw that there was light at the end of the tunnel, and this light for him was the creation of a state for the people of the Jewish people.
He was a visionary, but he also was a very fast learner, and he learned Arabic. Why?
Exactly. He did learn Arabic, and one can actually wonder why a young boy would go to various bookshops in occupied Brussels, buying a German book to learn Arabic on his own. And the reason why he decided to learn Arabic is because, following his vision of the return of the Jewish people in Israel, which at this time was under the British mandate, he was very conscious that in this territory lived both Jews and Arabs, which he called by his own terms the son of Abraham. And he said that we Jews must live in peace with son of Abraham, and therefore we must know their language, which means, for me, we must also know their culture.
How does he describe his daily life in Brussels?
He's describing his daily life with very concrete words in a very simple manner about how important it was to get food with tickets, how important it was to obtain the paper to become a refugee in Brussels, which means that he and his family lived in Brussels under false paper and not as due. And he also was talking about his daily life. His father and his mother told him that he had to do something about his way of living, because, as you imagine, he could not go to school. He had to live, as we say, in a jail, which is not really a jail, but he could not go to school. He could not go officially somewhere, as well as his sisters. And one day his father suggested that he go to learn how to type a letter. He went to this school in Brussels to learn how to type letters on a type machine.
What would have been his message today to humanity and to the Jewish people if he were a survivor?
His message would be to the Jews that they must recognize and be aware of their identity. And it's only when someone is clear about his own identity that he can really contribute to the West and to better communicate with other people, including Muslim and Christians. What we can say is that because of his religion, he believed that there will be salvation, and the salvation will come from God, from his point of view.
This is The World with Tim Stackpool.
4 Asian countries are receiving $35 million from a worldwide emergency fund which supports underfunded or forgotten humanitarian crises. In total, 13 countries, most of them in Africa, will share $104 million from the Emergency Response Fund. Agencies in Pakistan, Nepal, the Philippines and North Korea are being allocated funds to deal with ongoing humanitarian crises. Daniel Dickinson asked Steve O'Malley, the fund's chief, which countries will benefit most.
The largest allocation of $15 million will go to Pakistan to help people who've been affected by conflict in certain regions of the country. There's another $11 million that will go to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, obviously facing a lot of food insecurity there. We also have funds which will go to Nepal and to the Philippines as well. So those are the 4 Asian countries that will benefit. It's a total of about $35 million, about a third of the money we're giving out.
How will this money be spent?
It will vary a bit country by country. In most of those situations, it will be up to the country team to define exactly how they're going to use the money. So the UN country team will sit together and they'll determine their priorities, which are the most underfunded situations, which are the projects where an injection of money would make the biggest difference for the population.
How important is this funding to those countries?
In certain cases, it's really very important. I mean, in the case of Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the SURF has been one of the main sources of humanitarian financing over the last few years. So it's been really crucial to keeping UN programs running there. In Pakistan, similarly, for the conflict-affected people, $15 million goes a long way.
You say it goes a long way, but we're talking about relatively small amounts of money in the big picture, aren't we?
You know, in the bigger picture, if you look at how much the totality of what the UN needs to keep going for a year in Pakistan or in Korea or Democratic People's Republic of Korea or Philippines, yes, it is relatively small. But what we think is important about it is if well prioritized, and that's why we let the colleagues at the field level make the decisions, if well prioritized, they can have an outsized impact. And certainly, I know from the colleagues in the DPRK that our support over the last few years has been really crucial to keeping their programs running.
Humanitarian aid is all about helping people. Are the people in those countries going to see any difference once this money is spent?
You know, that's exactly what we think will happen. And what we do is we make sure in the accounting that we get at the end of the year from the humanitarian and the resident coordinator, the UN resident coordinator, that it very clearly demonstrates what the added value of the funds were. And, you know, we're a very transparent fund. Anybody who wants to see what we funded can look at our website at surf.un.org. And every year, the resident coordinators' reports are put up there. So you can go up and say, well, what was the money used for last year? And you can see what the accounting is and what was the added value of these funds.
To what extent is it becoming more difficult to raise money for these types of forgotten crises?
We should not underestimate the effects of the global financial crisis on humanitarian and development budgets. I mean, a lot of the traditional donors have really tried to hold the line, but there are real budgetary pressures for them. So, it is not a great environment to go out and to look for more money. The SURF funding can be a really important part of plugging a gap, filling a hole, and allowing an underfunded program to continue, a really important program to continue.
And finally, to northern Argentina's impenetrable forest, where children from the indigenous Toba community are learning to play the cajon. Volunteers working to support families in the region hope the centuries-old drum box instrument could become a source of income for the Toba. NTN 24's Brian Andrews has more.
A music lesson with a difference in northern Argentina's impenetrable forest, as local children from the indigenous Toba tribe learn to play the cajon for the very first time. The instrument is a type of box drum that dates back to the 18th century and has gained in popularity since its introduction into flamenco music in the 70s. Despite never having played the cajon before, these young musicians are quick to get the rhythm.
Climbing onto the cajon is like getting on a bike. It allows you to feel the music rise up inside as you're playing.
Traditional farming in this part of Argentina used to provide Toba families with seasonal work. But now, as more of their ancestral land is being used for less labor-intensive soybean production, many are heading for the cities looking for work. These volunteers are working in the area trying to protect local indigenous communities. They believe the cajon could even provide a reliable source of income for the indigenous. With the help of a stringed instrument maker, they've set up a workshop where the Toba have begun making their very own version of the instrument.
It's from a tree known as the palo jabón, and put them inside the cajon. Because the seeds are so tiny and hard, they create a different sound. So now they have their own take on the cajon.
Some Toba workers have already started exporting their cajons to Europe as part of a project to help revive their community. Supported by a non-governmental organization, they've also installed a windmill providing access to drinking water and enabling them to grow crops all year round.
Now they have access to water, they hope to plant an orchard. Many communities have already done this. They choose what they grow and are then able to sell their products.
With the help of the cajon beat, northern Argentina's indigenous communities may one day become totally self-sufficient once again.
Brian Andrews from NTN 24 reporting there. And that is The World for this week. If you want to learn more about the program or wish to make a contribution to the show, then please do visit us at www.theworldradioshow.com. From there, you can also access our Facebook page and join the discussion on many of the topics raised in this program. The World is committed to bringing you stories that affect the people of our planet, either on a mass or individual scale, and we hope to do so with balance and integrity. The program is produced and compiled by Tim Stackpool, and I look forward to your company next time. Until then, bye for now.